Asus didn't send me a pre-release copy of the ROG Ally, but I did get this instead, and I'm in love, but also severely frustrated. As you guys know, we've been traveling for Computex. We've gone to South Africa to pick up Reece to go to Computex, and I've been needing a handheld to play on the way. And one of my biggest complaints with the Steam Deck is that it's not powerful enough, hence the ROG Ally excitement that I've been having. But Asus didn't send me one, so I was desperately trying to find what is the most powerful handheld I can bring on this trip. When AOKZOE reached out via email, asked me if I wanted to check out the A1 Pro. And they're claiming that this thing is the world's first Ryzen 7840U handheld. This has roughly the same specs that you're going to be expecting from the ROG Ally, with several different improvements, but also a few drawbacks, and this is going to be my initial overview of this A1 Pro. Because currently they're launching via Kickstarter. They have 5,731% funded as of the time of recording, and you have an early bird pricing for the base model of $799, which doesn't put it that far off from the ROG Ally, but you do get slightly better specs. The 7840U, while not as tuned as the Z1 Extreme for lower power profiles, it still has all of the feature sets that you come to expect from the U series chip, including the AI neural engine that's part of it, which the Asus ROG Ally is not going to have. But you also get 32 gigs of RAM, double what Asus is giving you with the exact same storage on the base model of 512 gigs. And you can also max it out to make it a really robust PC. For $1159 as of the time of recording, you can get 64 gigs of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage. This thing can actually replace a desktop in a lot of different scenarios. But that 7840U, as I mentioned, is roughly the same as the Z1 Extreme. It's on the 4nm Zen 4 process, 8 cores, 16 threads, 5.1 gigahertz boost clock, 24 megs of total cache. You got the Radeon 780M in the internal GPU with RDNA 3, 12 cores, up to 8.6 teraflops. That's GTX 1650 Ti territory in the palm of my hands. It has an 8-inch 1200p IPS display with 350 nits brightness, so a little less than the Ally, but it does have 100% of the sRGB color coverage. That 32 gigs of RAM that's on here and expandable to 64 is LPDDR5X at 6400 megahertz, and the SSD is PCI Express 4.0, 7 gigabytes per second read and 6.3 gigabytes per second write. It has a 65 watt hour battery. It comes with a 65 watt charger. You can upgrade that to 100 watts if you want. It can do PD fast charge, but one of the most frustrating parts is that it does not accept anything less than 65 watts. If you plug this in to the USB port that's on an airplane, you're not going to be able to deliver enough power. You have to plug it into a 65 watt charger or else it doesn't charge at all, which has been incredibly frustrating because I haven't had always the ability to plug in the fast charger to make sure that I'm charging it, and this thing chows through battery life. I haven't done extensive battery life testing, but you can expect an hour, maybe hour and a half in AAA games. I don't do a ton of emulation titles, but you could probably expand it if you are playing indie or light frame rate games. But one of the things that I do love the most about the A1 Pro is the physical feel. In the hands, this is super robust. It's actually a very thick device, whereas the ROG Ally is going for slim and sleek. This thing is thick and chunky. And now, having been able to hold the ROG Ally in my hands after going to Computex, it's a toss-up. I do think that the ROG Ally is more refined. It has the cutouts around where your hands rest to make it feel really nice in your hands, but I also do like the weight and the thonkiness that comes with the A1 Pro. But in terms of design, they're going for like 90s extreme adverts in aesthetic and styling. You've got the quantum blue version that I have right here, as well as the lunar white, but the quantum blue finish does scratch very easily, which has not been good for my travels. It also does have RGB around the hands with 20 preset lighting effects, but your hands cover the RGB when I'd just rather if you didn't include it. I guess it looks good when it's on a dock, but it's super not necessary. You've got a nice cooling design on the back, which is the intake, and then it has an exhaust out the top. And then also at the back, you do have a kickstand, which makes it really nice for resting and propping up on an airplane tray table to play without having to hold it up the entire time. But talking about comfort, I really like how it feels in the hand. The thickness, the weight, all of that's good. The button placement is super natural. The triggers don't feel the smoothest, and the top shoulder buttons have different levels of clicky feedback depending on where you press them. Like if you press them here towards the top, you're not getting a ton of click, whereas if you press them in the middle, obviously that's where you're gonna get better clicking. The D-pad is circular, which is not my favorite, not Reece's favorite either after you got to try it, but it works. However, the joysticks are Hall effects, so you don't have to worry about drift because it uses electromagnetic induction to make sure that everything's positioned properly, which is a good thing to have. And then you got several helpful buttons that are also here. You have the home button on the left, which will help you to minimize to desktop to get out of whatever game that you're playing. You've got the split button on the bottom right, which will bring up the on-screen keyboard, or if you hold it down, you can switch to a mouse input, which is super useful. And then the bottom half button is the turbo button, which brings up the A1 Pro's menu, so that you can have the quick access to device wattage, CPU max limits, fan curve presets, vibration settings, brightness, volume, resolution. Literally anything you need is pressed on with that one button, and you can change that while in game or otherwise. The software has actually been one of the best parts of it. Obviously, this is still a Windows handheld, so it does have a few of the drawbacks that the Steam Deck doesn't necessarily struggle with, but the A1 Pro was actually super easy to figure out how to navigate everything, either with mouse and keyboard or with the turbo button bringing up all of the presets to change the wattage of the SoC. Up top, you have a dedicated power button and then a volume rocker where the volume up and the volume down are backwards from how I would expect it to be. Left typically is down and right is typically up, but they have it swapped for some reason. And this kickstand, super sturdy. I'm not worried about necessarily breaking this. I/O-wise, you actually have a ton to work with here. You have a headphone jack up top, as well as a USB 4.0 port, which supports power delivery and an external GPU. It also has a full-size Type A 3.2 port, which is super helpful to have if you're trying to plug in any sort of regular accessory. You don't necessarily have to go to a dock situation to expand it out. And then on the bottom is another USB 4.0 port for charging or use for a dock, as well as a micro SD card slot for basic storage expansion needs. You also have two front-facing speakers on the bottom, which don't sound great. They do make a big deal out of the speakers on the Indiegogo campaign, and they're mid. Very honestly, very mid-range heavy, not a lot of substance to them. Depending on how your hands rest on the device, you're gonna cover up the audio anyways. So I love the ergonomics. The thing that bothers me the most is the fact that you can't have less than 65-watt charging. I would like a slow trickle charge, even if it's just to leave it overnight while I'm sleeping on a charger that's not necessarily supported. I understand why it can't be that way, but it's a little frustrating. The speakers aren't great. The D-pad could be better. The shoulder buttons, not fantastic. The joystick's great. The buttons that when you press them don't stick in or have any real problems. But the thing that I wanted this device for is obviously the fact that it's a 7840U processor. So we have the 780M GPU, which means that this thing can play games real fast. At 15 watts, just a quick test in Cyberpunk showed us running about 40 FPS average, but then bumping it up to the max 28 watts that's supported in the A1 Pro's software menu, we got 50.55 FPS, and that's with the Steam Deck preset at the native resolution of 1200p. If you drop it down to 720p with Steam Deck settings, you're getting over 60 FPS, which is what I have desperately wanted in a handheld. Something that will allow you to actually run AAA titles at 60 FPS at medium settings. I'm not asking for a lot. The Steam Deck cannot handle that. The 7840U, the Z1 Extreme definitely can. And so after having this thing for the last couple of weeks of traveling, I honestly cannot understate how much I love the ergonomics of this thing. It does have a few sticking points. It has a few weird design choices, but you are getting a decent amount of specs for the price that you're paying, especially compared to the ROG Ally. You obviously get roughly the same gaming performance. The cooling keeps it in check. The ergonomics are slightly different, but the main advantage this bad boy has is the fact that it has USB 4, and it's not the weird ROG XG mobile port where you can only use Asus's proprietary graphics cards to expand the power of this thing. You can use a regular Thunderbolt dock. Reece has a 3060 Ti sitting in his cupboard that I could easily hook up to this to give it a little bit more power. I think Asus has created a really great all-in-one solution where the lightweightness, the firm feeling in the hands, everything about the experience feels premium. The AOKZOE feels a little less like that, but a more open standard that allows you to have more flexibility moving forward, which I think I personally prefer and gives it a compelling reason to exist versus the ROG Ally. I would like the D-pad to not be circular. I would like it to support less than 65-watt charging. I would like firmer shoulder buttons. I'd also like better speakers, but overall, the A1 Pro has a lot going for it. I am still desperately waiting to get my hands on the ROG Ally when it launches next week. I do have one pre-ordered. We're going to be giving one away because I said that if it came in at the price point of $699, I would give one away. So we're going to be doing that over on our Twitch channel. But this is our quick first look at the AOKZOE A1 Pro. I like it. It's a bit heavy in the hands, but it does have a compelling reason to exist. Let me know what you think of it down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys here for the next video. Cheers.